All right, so that chocolate should be into your system by now. If you ate it at the beginning of this lecture, it's been digested. The carbohydrates have been digested and absorbed and should be in the system getting turned into ATP if your body needs the ATP. If it doesn't need it, well, then it's getting stored as glycogen. If it doesn't need any more glycogen, then it's getting stored as adipose or lipids or fats. So it's all about what your body needs, and it will take the nutrients you've given it and turn it into the things it needs. But energy-wise, ATP is the key, guys. Every living thing needs that. So what we're going to talk about now is the environmental side of chocolate. We just think, oh wow, it's a great candy bar. I love it. It's tasty. It's good. I'm happy. What's the environmental impact of growing chocolate? So let me increase this. Ooh. Okay. Something we probably don't think about. Where does it come from? How do we get chocolate here in the U.S.? I like it. I enjoy it. Maybe I'm a business owner and I can profit from it. But what's the environmental impact of growing chocolate? Is it good for the environment? Do we care about that? Is it even a concern of ours? But let's take a look at some of the information behind it. So, cacao, this cacao tree, is considered an evergreen type of tree. And when we use the term evergreen, we often think about Christmas trees. Yes, they are evergreens. Any plant that retains leaves year-round is an evergreen. And it just drops a few leaves here, a few leaves there. It's always got green leaves. That's what's meant by an evergreen. It doesn't mean Christmas trees. Christmas trees are a type of evergreen. There's lots of evergreens out there. So this is an evergreen plant. Well, cacao is actually a tree. That grows in tropical climates. We're not growing cacao in the United States. Maybe we could do some in the very southern U.S., Florida, Texas areas. There might be some areas, but this is not usually something grown in the United States. In order for this tree to grow, ideally it has a forest canopy that has up to 40 to 70% shade. So it's not in the middle of the field in the tropics. It's got stuff growing over it. Cacaos do not like full sun. They like shaded. Similar to ferns and different plants we see growing in Illinois. So if you look at the forests or the woods in Illinois, there are plants that grow inside the woods and do wonderful because they like a certain amount of shade. Cacao is like that. Now the challenge with cacao is it takes about 5 years to reach maturity. So you plant your cacao seed and you got to wait 5 years before you're getting a harvest. Imagine anybody who's involved with agriculture, imagine that challenge. I'm going to plant this and I have to wait 5 years. That's what we deal with when we're in agriculture that is not corn and beans, not crops that you plant yearly. Think about an apple orchard. It takes years before those trees start producing. Cacao is no different. It's a different type of agriculture. So 5 years to get the seed to maturity to give us fruit. All right. Now what is kind of weird is if you look at, there's our flowers, they're flowering plants. If you look at the fruit, this picture here, the fruit actually grows on the trunk of the tree. It's a little weird. I mean, when I've seen cacao plantations in Central America, and it is kind of weird to see the fruit growing on the side of the tree instead of off of a branch like an apple or a peach. But it's just the way these plants grow. When you take that pod, that fruit, this whole yellow pod here, and you pop it open, inside of it, there's usually around 40 seeds to a pod. So these little whitish things here, these are the seeds. So 40 seeds per pod. Say you get 10 pods to a tree, you got about 400 seeds. The seeds, or we call them cacao beans, are then fermented, ground, roasted, separated into different components. You get your cacao butter, you get your solids, what they call nips, and it can be processed into a variety of different cacao products. It's not chocolate yet. We're still a ways away from chocolate. But this is how this plant is grown. All right, so environmental side of this. Well, if I'm going to grow cacao because there's this huge demand for chocolate in the world, I need land. Let me deforest. Let me take out the rainforest and turn it into a cacao plantation. No different than what we do in Illinois when we take out a forest to turn it into a bean field. Take out a forest, turn it into a cornfield. Take out a forest, turn it into whatever. Deforestation. So we're deforesting, not we, people in developing nations in order to meet the global demand for chocolate. Agriculture is a foundation to build a society that has a larger amount of resources available in regards to healthcare, schools, infrastructure, etc. You need to have a big agricultural base. That is a challenge. So the trouble or the challenge here is, as more and more areas of the world are deforested, how does that screw up global climate? So we're not deforesting the tropics, but by purchasing chocolate, we're encouraging the deforestation of the rainforests, which are impacting global climates. So it's all connected. And that's the challenging part, is to figure out how do we continue to purchase chocolate, how do we get the chocolate we want, but not support deforestation. That's where you get into the sustainable issue. All right, so here's some challenges. We'll just call them problems when cacao plantations are produced. Monoculture, bad idea. One crop, not good. It's not sustainable. If it fails, you have huge problems. You have a major loss of biodiversity when you go into monoculture. Soil loss. Due to erosion, nutrient loss, and eventually it moves into this thing called desertification. So the areas that have been deforested the land is not healthy. It's the same challenge we have in the U.S. when we do monoculture. the quality of the soil declines. We have to put massive amounts of fertilizer on it. We get fertilizer running off. We're using pesticides. All the agricultural problems we have here also apply in these developing countries. And the consumer is what's driving this. So, as this continues to happen, there's an increase in CO2 emissions because usually you're cutting it down and burning it. More CO2 is emitted, less CO2 is absorbed because you lost your forest, and it's contributing to climate change. So major problems when we get into large-scale cacao plantations. So ideally, what we want is more biodiversity, a healthier forest. Can we do this through sustainability? So forests naturally hold moisture. What you're looking at here is what's called transpiration. So the trees, generically let's call it sweat, they lose moisture. That moisture goes up, depending upon the climate, can actually come back down as rain. I've watched this in the tropics, where it just basically rains on itself. Trees absorb it, goes back up, rains back down on those same trees. So they're basically regulating the climate. So when we look at having a diverse forest, they help regulate climate. It's incredibly important, incredibly helpful. The challenge is the economics behind it. If I'm a cacao farmer and I can wipe out the forest, I can clear the forest and go strict cacao plantation, I can grow more cacao faster, produce seeds quicker, make more money on a shorter time frame. But is that sustainable? So that's the idea, or the tough part is figuring out how to do these things sustainably. Now, when we talk about sustainable, it takes longer because you're waiting that 5 years to get your first harvest. But you have an increased biodiversity. You're going to help regulate the climate more. You're going to have a definite decrease in chemical use, whether it's pesticides, herbicides, things that kill insects, things that kill plants, the nutrients you have to put into the soil for your plants to grow. All these things are present in sustainable chocolate production. But here's the problem. It's a decreased short-term profit compared to unsustainable. So, let's talk about the law of supply and demand. So anybody's in business knows this. Small supply, big demand, higher price. If we're growing this stuff sustainably, we have a smaller supply. Is there a big demand for it? Will consumers say, yes, I want sustainable chocolate? So there's a big question mark for all of us, every one of us. Are we willing to pay more for sustainable chocolate? All right? So we'll answer that question or pose some other interesting questions when we pick up on the next part.